January 6th, is it the worst thing that's ever happened since 9/11, since the American Civil War? And do you get any objective reporting on it? Is it wrong to riot? I would say it is. Is it wrong to use riots to implement favourable bills and fund a new internal army? I would say it is. Let's have an objective look at January the 6th and the way it's being used by the establishment. Hello there, you 6.3 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage towards truth and freedom, which will mean new alliances, new conversations, a willingness to move beyond the limitations of the bourgeoisie and into fresh new conversations where everyone is invited. I've got a new stand-up special out. There's a free clip at the end, so stay to the end of the video. Go over to Rumble where you can get it now if you want it, and turn on the notification bell right now so you see our content every single day. Now, January 6th has been in the news a lot, not just because of the event itself, but because of the way that it has been reported. For the sake of clarity, my general opinion is this. It's wrong to be violent under any circumstances. It's wrong to hurt other people. It's wrong. It's simply wrong. I would never advocate for violence. However, I also believe that American democracy is in real trouble, and I don't have a sense of sanctimony around the buildings, symbols, and epitomization of American democracy. Our democracy! We were doing so well! That's where we accept all our lobbying money! That's where we accept donations from! But what we want to know is, how is this story being used? Is it being used to pass laws, for example? Is it being used to raise funds, for example? Is it being used to divide people? And more generally on the subject of censorship, do you want to be given information and decide for yourself what you believe, or do you want someone to decide on your behalf what information you're able to see? Now, you know that I went on Tucker Carlson recently, and I personally found him a very convivial and enjoyable person to be around. With the subject of January the 6th, it's pretty obvious that you could take footage of an event and show footage that made the riot look more peaceful, or you could show footage that made it look worse. So I'm aware of what censorship means and what editorialization means. So let's try, amidst that understanding, as well as our general cynicism and weariness around, in particular, the corporatization of American democracy and how ill-deserved any sanctimony around those institutions are, while still respecting that we shouldn't, as human beings, be harming or hurting one another. Let's have a look at this story, how it's being portrayed, who's using it, and to what end, and see if together we can come to some sort of consensus around what January 6th actually was, how it should be reported, and how it's been used.
Misleading and offensive. That is how the Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger described the presentation of footage from the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol on Fox last night.
I'm always concerned when a news outlet accuses another news outlet of being misleading, because, as you know, I believe that they're all equally misleading, or to varying degrees misleading. Who cares? They're all misleading. And the idea of offensive, that's linguistic lobbying for censorship, that is. And I'm assuming what you're saying is offensive to the people who died or were injured. But I don't believe that, because that presumes a particular outcome. We can't show you this footage, it's offensive. No, show me the footage. I can handle being offended. I'll look at the footage and I'll form an opinion based on what I think, not a curated idea. Now, of course, I'm not saying that Tucker Carlson is objective. Tucker Carlson has a perspective. I understand that what Tucker Carlson thinks is both the Republican Party and Democrat Party and mainstream media are so corrupt that you can't discern truth. And in these areas, I agree with him. And when I was on his show, I talked about the areas where I don't agree with him. Cultural ideas and homelessness. And guess what? We had a conversation. As far as I know, no one died. So perhaps what we can have is open, honest conversations where we're presented with evidence and allowed to form our own opinions. The alternative is more control, more authoritization, more censorship, more prescriptive realities.
For the second night in a row.
For the second night in a row. Almost as if he's on TV every night. Nightly news programs tend to happen on consecutive nights. Don't editorialize that. For the second night in a row. And we can only assume that the next night he'll be doing more stories. That shows that there's the application of hysteria and hyperbole in the rendering of simple information.
Fox News host Tucker Carlson used his exclusive access to more than 40,000 hours of video from January 6th to create an alternative reality of what many witnessed.
It's not an alternative reality, is it? It's an alternative perspective. He's not Quetzalcoatl. He's not a Mexican feather god shaman. Whoa, look at reality. No, everyone's made of waffles. It's just Tucker Carlson showed stuff that hadn't been shown before, in the same way they're doubling down on the smashing of the windows. According to the footage, people did smash windows. We can see that. And according to footage, people did show that shaman around. Both of those things are true. Presumably, one media outlet has a vested interest in seeing the windows getting smashed, and another media outlet has a vested interest in showing people being shown around. So of course, it's possible that the shaman dude was being shown around because the police had been told, look, don't escalate this anymore, keep things chill. That's perfectly possible, isn't it? But what it also shows is that when they were in the Capitol, they weren't all of the time running around going, roaring and shitting on flags or getting George Washington and going, I hate America! The whole thing was clearly in its own weird, strange way underwritten by a type of patriotism and ultimately a result of, I would say, ongoing escalating tensions that have been happening in the United States of America for a long time now. That's not the same as saying, I think it's really good that they did that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is, should we look at what's causing this? Should we look at what's escalating this? Should we look at where democracy is failing? How powerful do you think that group of people are? I believe this when you're talking about subjects like immigration, any minority. Look at where power is. Is the power with those people rampaging about? It was a ridiculous example of public disruption that tragically led to injury and death. That should be dealt with. But what you also have to deal with is the failings in democracy, the failings in media, the failings in corporatization, the failings in politics. There's so many failings that need to be addressed. And what I believe happens is they amplify particular aspects of the story so that you can't even discern significant, and in my view, more significant issues that if they were changed, you would automatically solve that problem. Also, whether you agree with Tucker's narrativization or not, can you, with hand on heart, as a liberal person, say we shouldn't have access to the footage? Where's the liberalism in that? Don't show me that! Well, I can look at it and still go, yeah, well, even though in that bit they're behaving peacefully, in this bit they're obviously smashing the windows. Can't you? Can you do that? Or is there something to hide? What are you afraid of? I don't like authoritarianism and I don't like censorship, and neither should you, because it means that power is somewhere else.
Some January 6th facts to weigh alongside Tucker Carlson's new January 6th fantasy.
Fantasy. It's not as simple as that, is it? Obviously, all of the footage is real footage. No one's saying that it didn't happen. So evidently, there were moments where there was insurgency and smashing stuff up and revelry and chaos and evidently, empirically, demonstrably, legally violence. But the fact that lawyers weren't given access to footage suggests something. The fact that there are calls for censorship suggests something.
Tucker Carlson now is lying and deceiving his own loyal viewers. Before you jump in, I just want to say they have trained people to say, don't believe people like us.
They've trained people. That's not a one-way street, coaching and training your audience. If you're going to say that one side are downplaying it, you have to acknowledge that the other side are amplifying it. And that would become especially true, I would contest, if there were bills, legislation and expenditure tethered to the narrative that's being presented. Wouldn't you? And please note in the corner there, America addicted fentanyl crisis. America is suffering. America is in pain. People are not happy. Democracy isn't working. Why are we focusing on narrowly framed issues that enable people to make profit and pass laws? Oh yeah, because if you narrowly frame issues, it enables people to make profit and pass laws. If you broaden out and go, what's going on? Of course it isn't right. That's obvious to any sensible person that rioting and hurting people isn't right. Are there people advocating for that? Are there people going, I like the way they hurt people? Are there? I disagree with those people. But who I agree with are the people that say, give us the information, let's decide for ourselves, let's acknowledge that everyone's exaggerating and see if between us, through conversation, we can come up with a reasonable, consensual perspective on this so that we can ensure that it doesn't happen again, doesn't need to happen again, because we've dealt with the conditions that led to it, as well as the event itself, and that we include the people, the dispossessed of all colours, persuasions and identities, that for various reasons and various causes feel that the only way to be heard is through action on the street. We saw a summer of it because of police violence, because of institutional racism. We saw rioting and unrest. If it's happening, it has to be dealt with, whether you agree with it or not. And I would argue, particularly if you don't agree with the issues, if they don't chime with your own worldview.
Yeah, thanks, Klaus. Yeah, I'll learn nothing and I'll be happy. Thank you. Hey, have you ever heard of a data broker? Of course you haven't, because the mainstream media won't tell you about them. They're the middlemen collecting and selling all those digital footprints you leave online. They can stitch together detailed profiles which includes your browsing history, online searches, and location data. The data broker then sells your profile off to a company who delivers you a really targeted ad. Well, you might be surprised to learn that these same data brokers are also selling your information to the Department of Homeland Security and the IRS. ExpressVPN. When you're connected to ExpressVPN, your IP address is hidden. They don't know nothing about it. That makes it much more difficult for data brokers to identify who you are. You are mysterious now. All I do is tap one little button, turn it on, and I'm protected. It's that easy. I've organised this for you myself. I've got a bit of clout over at ExpressVPN. Look, just tell them Russ sent you. You'll get 3 months extra through my special link, expressvpn.com/brand, to learn more and finally be safe from the bloody system. Now, let me just get back on the phone with Klaus. Yeah, no, I've done it, mate. It went quite well, I think.
Here's a perspective from Jacobin, from friend of the show, Branko Markotic. It's significant that nearly 2/3 of those arrested for taking part in the riot had histories of financial troubles, from bankruptcies and unpaid taxes to evictions and foreclosures. Perhaps this plays into what's currently happening with the banking collapse. Perhaps this, like the rise of Trump, is some way instigated by the 2008 financial crash. Of course, there'll be people watching this now going, you can't say that the Capitol insurrection is justified when you look at 2008. It's not about justification. It's about explanation. It's about recognizing that people are deeply dissatisfied and unhappy. That's what public unrest is. People don't just decide to get up, go to the Capitol, smash stuff up for a laugh. It always means that there is unhappiness. And guess what? I would apply the same thing to crime statistics, to crime figures, to drug addiction. So I don't cherry pick which issues I apply compassion to. I try to apply them always, which is difficult, obviously. It's significant that, as University of Chicago researchers found, the vast majority of those arrested were unaffiliated with right-wing militias, were older, and told authorities and journalists they were simply following their president. It is significant that former and even active duty military and law enforcement were an important cohort among those who attended. That is significant. So patriotism, nationalism, ideas that a short while ago were de rigueur, necessary. I felt the same thing about our country, Britain, when the Brexit events happened. People were told just a couple of generations ago that you should lay down your life for your country. So nationalism's bred into people when it's convenient, and people are asked to discard it when it's no longer de la jour, when it's no longer favourable or fashionable. But people have been conditioned to believe that they're meant to lay down their lives for their countries. And if there is a lot of dissatisfaction and unrest and social disease and corruption, these kind of feelings have a tendency to spill out. It's not a justification, it's an explanation. There's a difference. The big companies that pledged to stop funding these insurrectionists have reopened the money tap now that the cameras have stopped rolling. They can do so because neither Congress nor the President has even bothered to attempt to curb the poisonous influence on money in the US political system, nor was that ever on the table. How could it be when both parties rely on the very same system of corruption for their own political success? Meanwhile, Biden and the Democrats have left untouched the deeply exploitative and unfair political economy that's reigned for decades, which the great mass of voters have been rebelling against in various ways for the past decade and a half at least. The super rich still barely pay taxes, healthcare is still a dysfunctional mess, and the average American is still crushed under a phalanx of ruthless creditors. While worker militancy is growing, aided by the unique conditions of the pandemic and the expired forms of government support Biden can't or refuses to extend, the precarious financial picture hasn't fundamentally changed for most Americans. Responsible reporting means that you include the conditions that might have led to a particular event. Sometimes it's difficult to do that because it invites you to consider that you might be wrong, that you might have to look at people that you disagree with and try to understand them. It's not difficult to look at people that you don't culturally like and go, oh, they're idiots, they're savages, they're morons. But let me tell you, I believe that that greatly contributes to the exacerbation of the cultural tensions that we've been feeling long before this event, and is expressed in numerous cultural movements from all across the political spectrum. People don't feel like they're being policed fairly. People don't feel like they're being heard. It oughtn't matter what cultural group they belong to. You ought look at the broader picture. Significantly, part of our contribution to this conversation, I hope, is to suggest that whether you are a Black Lives Matter protester or a pro-Trump protester or insurrectionist, I'm not bothered about the language, you have more in common with one another than you do the centralized, institutional, financially backed political systems that do not hear your voices and do not demonstrate any compassion with you except emphatic, emblematic, symbolic and non-consequential ways. I.e., there is no no reorganisation of society that is favourable to ordinary working people, regardless of their cultural, racial or gender identity. That is why the exaggeration and exacerbation of social conflict, which I believe is happening in this case, is a part of the modus operandi of centralised power. Make them hate Trump voters. Make them hate BLM protesters. Make everyone hate one another so that we can't come together and say, okay, you have a different set of views to me, but ultimately none of us want this massive wealth transfer. None of us want this endemic poverty. None of us want these ongoing wars. Shall we try and change the system itself and leave one another alone? What we've gotten instead is the one thing, the only thing that the Washington establishment and depressingly many rank and file liberals clearly still believe the country is capable of doing: ramping up the national security state. In response to the Capitol riot, the Capitol Police have become a national anti-terrorism squad. The FBI has doubled the number of its domestic counter-terror agents and consequently its domestic terrorism caseload. An explosion of anti-protest laws, and there's talk of more security state expansion to come. All this, even though none of it would have prevented the breach of the Capitol, which happened despite copious foreknowledge of what was going to happen among authorities. Perhaps some of you see a corollary with the tragic events of 9/11, an egregious attack on ordinary Americans, which was then used to leverage laws that increased surveillance that affected everybody in order to prevent terrorism. What we saw was increased surveillance of ordinary people, the ability of the state to track you and capture your data without your consent, and it seems that always crises or even events of this nature are used to legitimize authoritarian measures, profitable measures, and to curtail the freedom of ordinary people. Let me know if you agree in the chat and the comments. This is an issue that goes beyond left and right politics, as all important issues do nowadays. The US Congress on Thursday approved a $2.1 billion emergency funding to replenish the Capitol Police and bolster security after the January 6th riot. So they've literally used it to introduce new laws and to increase expenditure. So whatever you think about that event or the use of the footage subsequently, one thing you can measure and discern is that they used it to give $2.1 billion to the Capitol Police and to change the law. That happened. No one's disputing that. That's objective. That's the same as watching all the footage and coming to a conclusion about it yourself. Try and find a clear example of modern liberalism's haplessness and inability to respond to structural crisis or its anti-populist strain in action. All the underlying issues that led to January 6th have been left to keep festering, and low-level rank-and-file Capitol rioters who were accused of little more than trespassing in a government building have been severely dealt with. Meanwhile, the politicians and entities that quite consciously manipulated them have faced next to no consequences or constraints in their power, all just in time for round 2 in 2024. Many have pushed hard to turn January 6, an event where all but one of the 5 people who died on that day were the actual, inverted commas, terrorists, into a second 9/11. A tacit admission that the horizon of political possibility is now purely limited to more arrests, more jails, more cops, more bureaucrats snooping through your private things. An excellent perspective that indicates that no one has a vision for a better America. Not the right, not the left. No one is talking about reconciliation, harmony, togetherness, community, autonomy, change, challenging authority, challenging centralized power. Both sides, whether they claim they're neoliberal or new conservative, are saying pretty much the same thing. Give us more ability to introduce laws, give us more money, give us more wars, give us a media that's not willing to report objectively on this situation. I would contest that that is exactly the kind of environment that breeds fear, doubt, conspiracy, conflict, and just plain old fear. And what you deserve in America and what we deserve in the rest of the world is open democracy, open conversation, a reliable media, access to the footage, the ability to make decisions for ourselves, and an honest conversation about the conditions that lead to uprisings, violent or otherwise. It usually means inequality has gotten out of hand, ordinary people don't have enough autonomy in their lives, people are dissatisfied with the present systems of government, and I'd say even more broadly than that, there is no vision for what the future holds. There is no one saying, this is the America we're going to build. These are the kind of communities that we're going to have. This is what your life can be like for you, your families, your loved ones. This is the country we want to build. These are the communities we're interested in. If all you do is say, we hate them, you hate them, let's all hate on each other, they're biased, it doesn't get us anywhere. We have to talk about a new vision together, and it will involve community, autonomy, and it will involve acceptance of other people and looking with compassion upon the actions of others. Without that, we're just going to be playing into their their hands. We'll have more events like this, and the response will always be the same. Give us more money, give us more laws. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments in the chat. Have a look at both of these videos. They're both cracking. There's a clip of my stand-up at the end of this. Have a look at it. Then go get it if you want it. It's available exclusively on Rumble. To hell with the mainstream media. More important than any of that is that you please stay free. All right. The beginning bit of the pandemic, it was like really nice. It was about a month where it was like a free holiday, and I thought this is going to be beautiful. That spirit didn't last that long, did it? You won't get addicted to that. You take it in a jungle. I'm not going to not get addicted to something because there's a toucan nearby. You should not let your children look at screens. Now I've got them, I'm like, oh, stick Netflix on and give it a Rolo, will ya? That clip was from my new special, Brandemic, only available on Locals. You can buy the special for $20 or you can become a member of our community to get both the special and all my Locals content for one whole year.